Okay, in this first workshop, we are working about the topic how to develop teaching and learning through technology. This workshop is divided in four different points in which we are going to introduce all the contents related with the PRUDMET project and with the workshop of the PRUDMET project. And also we will start explaining how to implement technology in learning in the classroom. And more specifically, the first point is called Introduction to the TTD workshop. That means that in this point, we are going to explain how to teach and learn using technology. Specifically, we can identify 8 workshops that work in different aspects. The objective of the workshops is not to analyze a specific technology and learn how to use a program. The idea is to understand how to implement and how to use the technology collaborating with other colleagues or technicians in the same institution, and at the end achieve a higher improvement in the achievement of the objectives of the students. These are the 8 workshops, but also we have implemented a process of mentoring that will help us to achieve the objectives of the different workshops. One important point in this first section is explaining what are the objectives of the TTT workshops. In this case, obviously, we try to promote the design of teaching using technology, but the most important is to be more effective in the use, because sometimes we use the technologies in the classroom, but without a plan, a predetermined plan. And then we implement technologies only when we consider that is necessary, but not related with the objectives. The last point of this first section is how to engage in the course. In this point, the idea is that we explain to the trainees how they can enroll in the different units. For example, in this case, they need to fulfill the competency tool assessment of the PRUDMET progress, and according to the results, they decide what are the workshops that they have to work. They don't need to work in all the workshops. They can work in 1 or 2 of them, depending on the results. This is the first point of the unit. The second is related with the idea of starting with learning outcome first. For this topic, the things that we are going to reflect is about how can we design the learning outcomes. That means that we start first with the learning and later with the technology. We don't implement technology only because we consider that is interesting. The idea is to relate learning outcomes with technology. For this reason, we will try to ask questions such as this question you can see here. For example, what are the learning objectives of the module course? What are the skills that the student need to achieve at the end of the course? Or, for example, how to build the skills that are valuable in the labor market. The next one is this one. The next point is basically what are the technologies that we can use to achieve these learning objectives. Because in this case, some technologies can be better to build certain kind of skills. And the idea is to work directly with the technology that we consider that are more interesting and more important. And for this reason, the last point of this unit is basically where to find out about the technologies. Where to find out, sorry, I don't know what's happening with my screen. Where to find, can you see it's correct?
Yeah, we can see.
I don't know why my screen is in white now. where to find about technologies. In this case, the idea is to identify the sources in which it is possible to look for identify technologies that we can apply. The next step on the third point of the unit is related with the beginning of the design process. That means that the idea, basically, is understanding the context in which the learning happens. And for this, it's important to reflect about the students, about the teachers, and about the technicians. That means about the three pillars that are important for the correct implementation of the technology in learning. And we will try to answer to these questions that you can see here related with the expectations, level of students, the level and engaging of the teachers, or the resources that we have available in the institution. It is important also, before designing the process, understanding the culture of the institution and try to create a tech-friendly environment, because it's necessary to have this kind of environment to implement the different technologies in teaching and learning. For the design, there are two important principles. The first is that the technology is a strategic tool, is an important tool, but it's not the main. The most important are the learning objectives, and we need to highlight this before designing. Another important point, another second principle, is that it's important also to identify what the students will do with the technology, because we can use only technology developing a passive and for example, the student can only see how we use the technology, or they can interact or create technology. It's important to identify at what level we need to develop the different competencies of the student. With regard to the framework of design, the framework of design is divided in 4 steps. The first is define what are the technologies that can facilitate the learning. The second is assess, that means see if we can use it or not, if they are prepared, if they are not prepared, if this technology can have a real impact in the learning or not. The third point is implementation, and with implementation, the evaluation of the results. And finally, the last step in the design is the redesign. That means to reflect about if the results that we have achieved at the end are as we expected at the beginning or not. For the design, we can identify some good practices in the use of technology in the classroom, such, for example, they incorporate digital tools, use social media platform, use in class mobile devices, or incorporate technology-based assessment, or the use of online resources. There are only 5 examples of how we can design the learning using technology. And the last section of the workshop 1 is called Designing Authentic and Engaging Learning Interventions. For this, the first point, obviously, is define what is an authentic engaging learning. Authentic engaging learning is related with the idea of teaching and evaluating, promoting certain kind of experiences that can be interesting for the students and that can emotionally or intellectually engage them in the process of learning. In fact, learning is optimal when it's more related with real life experiences and when students develop an active role in the teaching and learning process. How can we include these engaging activities? In this case, for example, we propose that we can include engaging activities incorporating these active learning strategy, different active learning strategies that probably we will see in other workshops, or simply using multimedia, or including activities that can have some kind of real world examples. Nevertheless, the best way to engage students or create authentic engaging activities is by the use of technology. And in this case, for example, we show 8 examples of how can we implement technology in teaching. We can introduce, depends on the area, because, for example, in management is really complicated to use some of them. But these materials can be used, for example, in science or in other kind of fields. and some technology that can be engaging and created this authentic and engaging learning can be, for example, the interactive learning software, virtual reality, augmented reality, gamification, robotics, simulations, and so on. Okay, and with this, we have the 4 points of the topic. What can be the exercise we can propose to the student, in this case, to the teacher that is receiving this training? For example, the main activity in this case can be to reflect about the use of technology that they are doing at this moment, try to design the learning outcomes, analyzing the different questions we propose in the first point, and then try to decide using the process that we propose in the point 3, how can they improve the learning objectives introducing technology. The idea is basically in this reflection exercise to apply the points 1 and 2, or even the 3, the points 2 and 3, and even the 4th, answering the questions that we propose in each of the slides. Okay, and this is basically the content for the workshop 1. In this workshop, following the example of the video developed by Valerie, we have also developed the video 1 that is in the YouTube is in the Trello. Okay, thank you. We can hear you.
I had muted myself. And I think one of the things that we just intend that people do when they're doing the exercise work is really to get people to bring along learning outcomes or course program descriptors, the sort of documentation that really underpins what you run in a course or a module or a session of learning, so that you can get them to really focus down on what the learning outcomes are. And first of all, maybe ask them to think about what technology is used in that area. Also be thinking about then how they can create engaging teaching, learning opportunities and assessment opportunities, and get them involved in talking about those learning outcomes. And I mean, sometimes I think when we talk about these things with people, they go, well, I'm not really sure what technology is used. I would always take them back to what happens in practice. What are people actually doing in practice, and how are people using technology? So let's say you had somebody, I'll take an example from our university, from English literature. They may, I know some of their teaching will use our Moodle online system, for example, to store materials and run assessment, as every module does and every program does within our institution. But that's really the administration of the learning. We need to get them to think about how to integrate what happens in writing. And even if they might say, well, okay, beyond using Word, beyond using publication tools for proofreading and those sorts of things, there isn't much that we use. Don't tell me that authors aren't using social media to promote their work, to engage with their audiences. That's becoming much more of what an author would do. And there's, of course, we can use the internet as research tools, all of those sorts of things. So whichever area somebody comes from is about getting them to engage with the use of technology in practice, to enable them to bring that back to their teaching, to make it more engaging. I don't know if anybody's got any questions on that section and what we're aiming to do there.